It was Jeremy's birthday. Like most people, it was one of many which he'd had over the course of his life. This was his 36th. Throughout the day, his friends, colleagues, and his girlfriend, Lainey, showered him with gifts and well wishes. His co-workers at the university where Jeremy worked as a lecturer and researcher in the field of theoretical physics held nothing back in respect to the tired puns and birthday jokes regarding entropy, cellular decay, and, at least from his older colleagues, comments about how it's all downhill from there. Not a word spoken was anything Jeremy hadn't heard countless times before, but in spite of this, he greeted each joke, comment, and happy birthday with a warm smile and genuine appreciation. He was among the most respected, if not the most respected researcher in his field. A prodigy since the age of 16, Jeremy's uncanny intellectual prowess was, to many, a thing of legend. Before even attaining his undergraduate degree, Jeremy had already been published multiple times in his 20s for his work on unified field theory, quantum gravity, and the hunt for dark matter. In addition to his professional and academic accolades, Jeremy was also quite possibly the most well-liked man on campus. Without anyone ever really understanding how or why, he seemed to have an almost preternatural way of reading people, seeming to know just what to say and just when to say it in nearly every interaction he'd have. To call him an impressive man would be, to most who knew him, a gross understatement. Jeremy spoke easily a half-dozen languages with the ease of a native speaker. He could play seemingly any instrument he put his hands on. He could recite works ranging from Homer to Shakespeare to Tolkien, all perfectly from memory, and his own writing almost universally had a lyrical quality and depth that could make even the driest of academic works read like poetry. His cooking was that of a 5-star chef. His body and fitness routines were those of a professional athlete. He was, at least in the eyes of so many a friend and colleague, as well as, of course, Delaney, a nearly perfect man. When asked by those around him how he'd learned the languages, skills, and disciplines he seemed to express with ease, Jeremy would simply say, "You just need to find the time." Though well-liked and frequently praised by nearly everyone he knew, Jeremy, as they would tell you, was not without his odd eccentricities. At times, perhaps simply due to being lost in thought, he would reference conversations with people they had no memory of having with him whatsoever, only to pause after a moment, laugh a bit at himself, and beg their pardon for his momentary confusion. Other times, often to the brief frustration of his colleagues, he would insist that a certain equation or experiment had been solved or performed when it was clear no such thing had taken place. Following these such incidents, he would almost immediately get to work on whatever he was talking about, manifesting his misplaced presumption into reality, excusing his oversight as mistaking his own thoughts for actual events. But for all his odd quirks, he was one of the most respected people in any room, nearly wherever he went, and today was his birthday. Toward the end of the night, following a luxurious dinner with his closest friends, Jeremy and Lainey retired to bed together, made love, and fell asleep. Jeremy's eyes closed, and as so, he thought one last sincere thought to himself, smiled a bit, realizing his life's work was nearing completion, and promptly drifted off to sleep. The baby blue, high thread count bed sheets spread out upon the California king-size bed enveloped he and his lady in a cocoon of sleepy luxury. They rested easy. They rested together. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin-size bed clung to his body. His birthday had been yesterday. He was now 16. Or more accurately, he was once again 16. Rising from his slumber, he stood up slowly, carefully reorienting himself with the balance of his much smaller frame. He looked about, unsurprised to see anything that littered the teenage boy's room. The band posters hung where he'd once hung them so very long ago. the slightly dinged-up flat-screen motel TV his parents had given to him, and his trusty old gaming console dominated the dresser at the foot of his bed. His bong rested safely and secretly in the corner of his closet. That last bit, like everything else, he knew without even needing to look. Jeremy was 16 again. To most, the prospect of going to sleep in the middle of your 30s, at the height of your life and career, only to wake up, having somehow traveled 2 whole decades backward in time throughout your own lifetime, might be something jarring, to say the least. The sheer maddening improbability, nay, impossibility to such a thing notwithstanding, the raw implications would be, and had been, almost more than anyone would be able to rightly handle. All progress, all relationships, all life experiences, all wiped away as time somehow reset. Children were unborn, love affairs had never happened, and whatever years of work one may have poured into their career would have been swept away into oblivion as the world undid itself while one was sleeping. It should be enough to drive one mad, yet for Jeremy, it was just another birthday. For unlike the rest of the world, which had forgotten 24 years of future time that now had never happened, Jeremy's memory of the quarter lifetime he had just lost was nearly perfect, as was his memory of the time before that, which had been in fact itself merely the most recent amidst many reiterations. Jeremy was unsurprised to have gone to sleep in his mid-30s and awoken once more, a teenager, as he had done so repeatedly, thousands upon thousands of times. The first time it had happened, Jeremy was again 36. He had lived a much different life that first time through. Dropping out of high school in his junior year, he had gone on to become a laborer in the hopes of learning a trade. When he was 35, then married to a nurse named Michelle with 2 children between them, Jeremy lost his job and the family fell upon hard times. In desperation, Jeremy attempted to make money for the family by turning to credit card fraud, only to find himself arrested, tried, and convicted. His 36th birthday was spent in prison. His first one, at any rate. As he laid his head down upon the scratchy, unforgiving prison cot that night, just as he drifted into sleep, a strange sensation overcame him, just on the cusp of a dream. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single, twin-size bed clung to his body. His birthday had been yesterday. He was now 16. Or more accurately, he was once again 16. This first reiteration would not prove to be much better than the last. Awakening in a panic, Jeremy scrambled about his room and screamed in terror. He was sure he had gone completely mad. He remembered every moment of his life so clearly, from leaving school to meeting Michelle, the babies. Every moment was as fresh a part of his past as they'd been the night before, but somehow, at that point, they were all gone. Gone to all but his memory of them. It was at that point Jeremy did in fact go rather mad. When called down by his mother so as not to be late for school, he went hurtling through the house and out into the street, screaming in terror and bewilderment. Upon attempting to explain to his parents the situation, he was quite promptly evaluated and committed by mental health services to an institution. Over many years of therapy, and for the next 20 years to be specific, Jeremy worked tirelessly to accept his reality as a delusion, even when world events transpired in ways he'd remembered. Try as he might, Jeremy's unusual and impossible position was one which drove him repeatedly back into the hospital, where he happened to be on the night of his 36th birthday. As the benzodiazepine he was given began to take effect, Jeremy laid his head and body down upon the unyielding hospital sheets and began to slide off into sleep. Just before falling into his own inky internal oblivion, a strange sensation overcame him, just on the cusp of a dream. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin-size bed clung to his body. His birthday had been yesterday. He was now 16. Or more accurately, he was once again 16. Though this time not doomed to a life in and out of mental health facilities, Jeremy found that with the first iteration of his life, now well over the equivalent of 50 years in the past, he had considerable difficulty recalling how to order his days in accordance with the way things had been. Rising this second time, and realizing that what he had been convinced was madness before was in fact reality, he struggled to recall how he was to go about his day. Class schedules at school, what he and his friends at the time had been up to, and even the part-time job he had at a local restaurant all remained as even fuzzier and more faded memories as they had the first time he'd turned 36. Calling in for a sick day and doing his best to both come to terms with what was apparently happening cyclically to him, as well as how to properly adjust himself for what was to once again come, Jeremy began the process of relearning his life. These cycles continued unabated. Jeremy would grow up all over again from the age of 16, each time with the same full set of memories as he had gone to sleep with at the age of 36, just the night before. From that second time around onward, he found it increasingly easier to recall and adapt to the life he lived in his youth. Each time he would grow, pursue any number of professional ambitions, love affairs, and a number of times even having families. Though decades removed at this point from his first life cycle, he found himself missing his children dearly. No matter how many times he'd try, though, no two families were ever the same. For a while, some 10 or perhaps 20 times looping through time in this way, totaling between 1 and 2 entire centuries of relative time, Jeremy learned to manipulate the otherwise constant goings-on outside of his own life. Memorizing winning lottery numbers, stock dips and spikes, crypto market evolutions, and in later iterations, mastering the art of building a business empire from scratch, Jeremy lived in repeating cycles for centuries, building and then surrendering to the reversed march of time, unfathomable wealth and power. After a while, though, these pursuits and the pleasures and privileges they afforded him grew stale and unfulfilling. Along these paths taken, he had learned to master most musical instruments, a pursuit he had always regretted never attempting in what he had come to call his original or prime timeline. Throughout his 20-year cycles, he had traveled extensively, leading him in time to pair his pursuit of musical mastery to that of also mastering languages. In addition to this, Jeremy had become a skilled athlete after deciding on multiple occasions to dedicate his 2 recycling decades at a time to becoming a master of whatever sport he pursued. Over time, he would come to win Olympic gold medals, the Tour de France, the PGA Open, and on one occasion, the Super Bowl. Though in that final sporting victory, it helped that he had in the previous run-through of his half-life gotten a job in the opposing team's locker room and had dedicated their big game playbook to memory. He was, as far as he could tell, the master of those repeating decades. With past foreknowledge gathering and building and allowing him unparalleled abilities to navigate the world, Jeremy at certain points found himself feeling like a god playing in a sandbox. But at the same time, he found that despite the centuries of accumulated experiences, the near guarantee that life could and would be nearly anything he wanted it to be every time, and the boundless opportunities for learning and experimentation, that he was growing very, very bored. It was in the midst of this growing malaise and increasingly oppressive boredom that one time at roughly the age of 35, feeling the impending reset that came upon every birthday, Jeremy decided to take his own life. Washing down a handful of pills with a bottle of Irish whiskey, he found himself getting very drowsy and closing his eyes for the last time in that cycle. Then, suffering a cardiac incident, he drifted into death, a strange sensation coming over him just on the cusp of the darkness. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin-size bed clung to his body. His birthday had not even happened, but once again, there he was. He was now 16, or more accurately, he was once again 16. There was at first a pang of confusion and frustration at the inadvertent recycle. He had, for countless resets thus far, always found it coming to him on his birthday, his 36th birthday specifically, always repeating and recycling back to this point. However, he was, for whatever reason, relatively certain that should he die before that time, the cycle may be broken. His frustration abated a bit, however, when he began pondering what this now apparent immortality could mean for his cycles going forward. He was a cautious person by nature, and always had been, hence facilitating centuries' worth of lived life without much in the way of serious threat to it. However, now, knowing that even in death he was destined and bound to return to that same morning and relive life again, a conflict of emotions filled him. Whereas he was now entirely free to do and try literally anything he cared to, without any genuine consequence, he likewise dwelled on whether this was in fact some sort of hellish punishment for some misdeeds in his first prime cycle. He could, as a man of now countless lived years, barely remember a thing about it beyond some vague echoes of a life from long ago. He remembered he had a family, the first of many. He remembered he had been incarcerated for something. He could no longer remember the details, though. In any event, the desire to end the cycles persisted. However, this new development led him to theorize that such simply wasn't immediately possible. To test this, Jeremy first checked the time. There were 30 minutes until the bus to school arrived, as it always had, and then another 15 which would elapse before both of his parents left for work. Heading out the door, as he always did that day, Jeremy, instead of boarding the bus, waited in a small wooded area just by his house until his parents left. Once the house was empty, Jeremy returned, slipped into his parents' room, retrieved his father's hunting rifle, and placing the barrel below his chin, shot himself through the brain. In the fraction of a microsecond before his death, a strange sensation overcame him, just on the cusp of the darkness. The next moment, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin bed clung to his body. His birthday had not even happened, but once again, there he was. He was now 16. Or more accurately, he was once again still 16. At this point, it was indelibly clear to Jeremy that, at least for the time being, there was no getting off this ride. Though dismayed at the prospect of having to potentially live and relive the same period of time, possibly in perpetuity, his centuries of learning, thinking, and maturing that far tempered his emotions appropriately. He began pondering, for the first genuine time, the deeper and truer nature to his cycling through time. Questions about the nature of such had occurred to him over the years countless times, but never before had the genuine mechanics of his condition ever really demanded such concrete and material answers. Heading to school that day, as he had so many times before, he decided this time around that pursuit of genuine knowledge, not just skill, fame, fortune, or power, would be his primary objective. No longer limited to wondering why this happened, he was now determined to answer both the why and the how to what exactly had been going on with him this whole time. Several quarter-life cycles passed, with Jeremy ravenously consuming every available piece of scientific theory in relation to the dynamics and functions of space-time itself that he could find. Earning PhDs in theoretical physics over and over, Jeremy began more consciously training his mind and memory so as to enter and re-enter each university and research program he found with the accumulated knowledge of the previous time. This continued for the equivalent of nearly a millennia, all contained within those increasingly brief-feeling 20-year cycles. To Jeremy at this point, each cycle felt to him what a year, a month, or even a week might feel to anyone else. 20 years would come, pass, come again, and pass again, blurring as time is known to do into one unending strand, passing relatively faster and faster as the years went on. On several occasions, Jeremy would even head to sleep at the end of a long day, only to have forgotten what day it was, awakening from his slumber once again as the stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin-sized bed clung to his body. His birthday had happened without him even noticing, and there he was. He was 16, or more accurately, he would once again be 16. With his mind continually filling up with new information, it occurred to him after some 60 years of cycles that he would need a way to fully retain all that he had learned, and so spending the following 40 repeating years studying neuropsychology and memory, developed for himself a revolutionary memorization system, akin to that of the mind palace or spaced repetition methods, which allowed him to more accurately and efficiently commit to memory the principles, theories, and discoveries he created and explored. After another 60 years of cycles, the method was perfected to where Jeremy was a man with near-perfect memory and recall abilities. This divergence from his previous 1,000 years' worth of study inspired in Jeremy yet another grand ambition. In addition to discovering the true nature to his own temporal condition, he now sought to craft and create a fully unified theory of everything. Not merely in physics or conventional scientific pursuits, but everything. For centuries to come, he took up whichever field of study he could find, wringing from their histories and theories and literatures and lectures every conceivable drop of knowledge and information that he could. His incredible memory system allowing his mind to record and retain all of it, making of him a secret repository for the entirety of a given field of study. He studied law, sociology, politics, history, ecology, technology, astrophysics, microbiology, medicine, psychology, psychiatry, and every and any other pursuit he came across. For several cycles, he, wishing to take a break from such rigorous academic research, even became a master carpenter, electrician, and plumber, desiring the experience of building his own home. Upon realizing he had failed to adequately research architecture itself, he became a world-renowned architect after a few quick cycles, and crafted for himself an elaborate estate home that wowed the worlds of design and construction. This he did for little more than the fun of it. Returning to his broad and seemingly boundless courses of theoretical and practical study, it was upon some 100th reiteration, upon effortlessly attaining yet another one of his countlessly awarded doctorates, that it occurred to Jeremy that despite his nearly perfect memory, none of his theories, findings, or conclusions would be of much or any use unless they were committed to record. How to keep records when upon every 20-year cycle, or upon each unexpected death, which occurred more frequently now that Jeremy no longer had any fear of such, said records would be erased from future history, and this was a problem which took him the equivalent of nearly 200 years to solve. But solve it he did, when in the midst of intense research into quantum mechanics and wave function, a new particle was discovered, which due to its curious structure and function, seemed to actually travel on an inverse trajectory through time. Upon this groundbreaking discovery, made many, many, many times over and over again, it only took Jeremy another century to devise a way to encode actual information into the particle stream and even manipulate their reverse temporal states and trajectories. Soon, he was recording his work and findings using his devised technology to embed them into sustained online databases that had existed in his youth. Now, Jeremy had almost everything he needed to not only formulate his unified theory of everything, but to commit it to posterity so it may be put into action were he and the universe around him to ever move beyond their loop. His pondering of that very situation quite naturally never ended. Over the lifetimes and lifetimes of learning and experience, he had pondered, postulated, and studied the theories of multiverses, temporal and causal loops, and, for a while, even toyed with a series of theological explanations. Had each of his lifetimes from which he had awoke young once more continued on without his individual conscience? Had the Jeremys he'd been throughout his repeating half-lives all continued on without him, bewildered at the change? Was there a timeline or universe, for instance, when, upon his suicide experiment all those centuries ago, that his parents and friends were forced to grapple with tragedy? Or was this repeating universe he seemed to inhabit boundlessly itself, alone in all creation, with it following along with him in an endless loop? Would this endless loop theory therefore constitute an effective end to time? Was his repeated cycling itself the end of existence, folding back on itself so as to avoid the physical impossibility of true nothingness? He had wondered for ages if there were others like him in the world, experiencing the same time cycle over and over. Yet, for all his searches, he never found a shred of evidence to support this notion. With time repeating over and over, always in the exact same way, affected or changed only by his intent and action, the notion of another with this condition seemed entirely improbable. He was, as far as he could increasingly tell, a temporal linchpin of some kind in the universe, and that, for better or worse, he was alone in being such. The night of his birthday, Jeremy encoded the first reversed message for his past self and sent it off. Chuckling to himself a bit as he crafted it, the world's first ever encoded quantum message read simply, "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." A play on the first words ever spoken over the telephone. Once sent, Jeremy sipped down a drink of fine scotch, returned home to his palatial estate, climbed into the oversized bed with silken sheets, and went to sleep. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy white sheets of his single twin-size bed clung to his body. His birthday had been yesterday. He was now 16. Or more accurately, he was once again 16. Grabbing his laptop, Jeremy began his day, boarded the school bus, made it to school, and then promptly skipped out and headed for the library up the street. He knew it would be quiet and private enough to work. Taking a seat in the library's reading room, he connected to the Wi-Fi, and using a series of VPNs and access code he'd committed to memory from his past future, accessed a deep web message board which had been and would remain dormant short of his inverted communications with himself. He wondered for a moment if he had at one point come up with the idea and created the board himself, for himself, only to forget later, but dismissed this causal loop question as soon as the message populated. Jeremy smiled broadly. This was a game changer. From now on, Jeremy would be able to routinely compile and hopefully eventually complete documentation on his unified theories. This became his new obsession. Several more iterations passed, then several more. Again, decades turned to centuries, and as they did, the reversed quantum flow of his grand thesis and masterwork grew larger and longer. Jeremy eventually even modified his process, allowing for contents which in documented form would number in the thousands upon thousands of pages to be condensed into simple lines of code which, when fed into even the most simple of ciphers, would automatically generate the complete work. It was all going brilliantly, and soon it would be complete. Contained within Jeremy's eventually finalized masterwork were effectively the answers to everything. Almost everything, at least. To him, the nature of his own looping condition remained a mystery, though not one he even spent much time thinking about any longer. With countless centuries and millennia having passed for him in this way, on an average day the question as to its specific nature or cause seldom if ever entered his mind, short of when it could be applied to a separate question. His work had become so engrossing and substantial that were mankind somehow to find a way to break free of his temporal cycling, which for all intents and purposes seemed to drag them and the rest of the universe along for the ride, his text would provide them the answers and solutions to nearly everything. Within that text, aging and even death had been cured. Faster-than-light travel had been cracked. Fully functioning AI and superintelligence had been modeled and for safe and effective development. Neural interfaces for computer networks, systems, and the classic theory of the singularity were all understood and designed for future use. Fusion and cold fusion forms of energy production were not only solved for, but dwarfed by the discovery and documentation of energy manipulation methods which could harness the power of the galaxy itself. His work was hardly even limited to medical and scientific discoveries and theories, though, with systems of economics, politics, social and civic order all crafted, utilizing centuries upon centuries of careful thought, study, and refinement. Means to reverse and avoid environmental catastrophes were all there, as well as defined and functional plans to successfully and effectively colonize other worlds. It was all in all an absolute and complete theory of everything, refined, reworked, added to, and perfected with each passing cycle. Finally, on what was a somewhat dreary and rainy day, while sitting at a terminal in his office at the university he had taken up a position at this time around, the last necessary lines of code, along with the cipher keys and all of the necessary information, was transmitted back through time to his deep web message board. It was at last done. Having noticed throughout this and his previous iterations that his masterwork of centuries upon centuries nearing completion, Jeremy had taken to being more reflective upon his life, not as a researcher or immortal being, but as a person. Despite the countless recycles causing him over time to largely drift away from what had originally been his life, causing him at times to be aloof or in certain iterations entirely reclusive and alone, he never failed to notice that those around him, his family, friends, and the women he would meet, always maintained a genuine and sincere love and affection for him. Recognizing over time that his connection to them seemed dulled or eroded given the endlessly repeating natures of them, while in many cases simultaneously indispensable as they had to him lasted for millennia, he in those previous 40-plus years had attempted to fully recall and re-engage with those mostly disregarded parts of his existence. He had been a man outside of time for so long, his own humanity was often a matter up for debate within his own mind. It was for this reason that over the course of particularly that cycle, in which his magnum opus was finished and recorded, following the centuries of looping and amending and adding and editing, Jeremy decided to reclaim what he could of his ordinary human life. His social circle was as broad as it was deep with each individual which entered it. Jeremy again learned to slow down once more, taking time for pleasant or deep conversations. Holidays with his family became once again something he looked forward to and relished. He learned in that short 20-year period to love deeper, speak with unbridled honesty in all matters, commiserate and celebrate with those around him as the courses of their lives continued. Using his unfathomable depth of knowledge, both in the broad reality in which they existed, as well as their individual natures and fates, Jeremy never passed up an opportunity to help any and all around him achieve their goals and realize their dreams. Lainey, who he had over the course of so many cycles dated, married, divorced, fathered children with, and in some instances simply ran off with, in that time seemed to mean more than ever to him. In all of his time looping and cycling, he had never felt such deep, real, and genuine bonds as he did in that cycle, and for a while, he regretted foregoing such, before then remembering it was best to just enjoy them while they lasted. It was Jeremy's birthday. Like most people, it was one of many he'd had over the course of his life. This was his 36th. Throughout the day, his friends, colleagues, and girlfriend, Lainey, showered him with gifts and well wishes. His co-workers at the university, where Jeremy worked as a lecturer and researcher in the field of theoretical physics, held nothing back in respect to the tired puns and birthday jokes regarding entropy, cellular decay, and, at least from his older colleagues, comments about how it's all downhill from there. Not a word spoken was anything Jeremy hadn't heard countless times before, but in spite of this, he greeted each joke, comment, and happy birthday with a warm smile and genuine appreciation. He was among the most respected, if not the most respected researcher in the field. A prodigy since the age of 16, Jeremy's uncanny intellectual prowess was to many a thing of legend. Before even attaining his undergraduate degree, Jeremy had already been published multiple times in his 20s for his work on unified field theory, quantum gravity, and the hunt for dark matter. In addition to his professional and academic accolades, Jeremy was also quite possibly the most well-liked man on campus. Without anyone ever really understanding how or why, he seemed to have an almost preternatural way of reading people, seeming to know just what to say and just when to say it in nearly every interaction he'd have. To call him an impressive man would be, to most who knew him, a gross understatement. Jeremy spoke easily a half a dozen languages with the ease of a native speaker, could seemingly play just about any instrument he put his hands on, could recite works ranging from Homer to Shakespeare to Tolkien all perfectly from memory. His own writing almost universally had a lyrical quality and depth that could make even the driest academic works read like poetry. His cooking was that of a 5-star chef. His body and fitness routines were those of a professional athlete. He was, at least in the eyes of so many a friend and colleague as well as, of course, to Lainey, nearly a perfect man. When asked by those around him how he'd learned the languages, skills, and disciplines he seemed to express with ease, Jeremy would simply say, "You just need to find the time." Toward the end of the night, following a luxurious birthday dinner with his closest friends, Jeremy and Lainey retired to bed together, made love, and fell asleep. Jeremy's eyes closed. He thought one last sincere thought to himself, smiled a bit, realizing his life's work was finally complete, and promptly drifted off to sleep. The baby blue high thread count bed sheets spread out upon the California king-sized bed enveloped he and his lady in a cocoon of sleepy luxury. They rested easy. They rested together. They both slept straight through the night. The next morning, Jeremy woke up beside his love. The silky baby blue sheets of his enormous bed clung to their bodies. His birthday had come and gone. He was 36. Still 36. In the following years and decades, Jeremy released his works to the world, causing a series of technological, medical, scientific, political, and social evolutions to occur seemingly overnight. Within 20 years, mankind conquered death, leading to a world where people could live forever if they chose to undergo a few minimally invasive medical procedures. Within 40 years, it began crafting superintelligence which would, in time, bring about exponentially more advancements based largely upon its own processing and building upon Jeremy's works. To Jeremy, this time passed in the blink of an eye. He continued to grow older, continued studying as well, still having not entirely cracked the first and fundamental question of his previous temporal condition. He married Lainey, and they had 4 children together, who he watched grow over time. So relative to him, it seemed as though no time had passed at all. Though true immortality was now available both through cellular reset in the physical world and digitally through a networked neural backup, Jeremy, a world-renowned celebrity at that point, made headlines by announcing he would not be extending his life beyond that which ordinary medical maintenance could provide. Nearing his 180th birthday, Jeremy, while poring over the latest rounds of data from his work with the previously discovered temporally inverted particle, made one final breakthrough. Though it would not be one he would publish, it solved the final real problem he had yet to crack. Priming his temporal linear displacement module, a more advanced form of his initial communication technology, he honed in carefully, not on a deep web message board or even anything data-related, but rather on a sleeping 16-year-old boy from centuries ago. Devising the necessary input code and folding the line through the quantum tesseract he'd modeled, Jeremy smiled with satisfaction as he hit send. The poor boy wouldn't know it the first time it would happen, some 20 years in his future, but in time, he would grow not only to save the world in its entirety, but to finally, just towards the end of it all, both be and understand the source of his causal loops. With a sigh, he stepped back from the machine, shutting it off for what he knew would be the last time in his lifetime. Some years later, surrounded by children and grandchildren, at the age of 200, Jeremy died peacefully in his sleep, and upon doing so, stayed forevermore in the darkness and void of death. The next day, Jeremy woke up alone. The stiff, starchy, white sheets of his single twin-sized bed clung to his body. His birthday had been yesterday. He was now 16. Thank you guys for listening. I hope you genuinely enjoyed that story. It's going to be the first of an anthology series I'll be writing and releasing here, as well as hopefully publishing down the line. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like on the video, share it with your friends, and leave a comment down below. If you'd like to hear more of such stories or enjoy the videos I do otherwise, feel free to subscribe and hit the bell for notifications when new videos come out. And additionally, if you'd like to support the production of these works and the work that I do here, consider using the links down below to become a patron today for as little as $1. In the meantime, I thank you again, and I hope you enjoyed this little story of mine. And I'll see you next time.